So, dear beloved community, I hope that you're happy and well wherever you find yourself in this moment. Perhaps we can have a few minutes of guided sitting meditation to begin our evening together. I invite you to find yourself in a comfortable and stable meditation posture, perhaps establishing yourself with your two knees or your 2 feet in contact with the earth. And then your buttocks on the first third of the cushion or the first third of the chair. Then gently rocking your spine to bring your spine into a sense of alignment and uprightness. Perhaps rolling back your shoulders slightly and resting your hands in your lap. And gently closing your eyes. And just taking a moment to bring your attention back to your in-breath and out-breath, wherever you feel it most in your body. Breathing in. This is my in-breath just as it is. Breathing out, this is my out-breath just as it is. Enjoying my in-breath, I breathe in. Enjoying my out-breath, I breathe in. Aware of my whole body, I breathe in. Smiling to my body just as it is, I breathe out. As I breathe in, I ease my body. As I breathe out, I experience joy. As I breathe in, I establish myself, body, speech, and mind firmly in the present moment. As I breathe out, I know this is a wonderful moment. So, dear beloved community, I hope that each of you is well. It's such a delight to be together with you and to have the opportunity to practice together with you and to continue our exploration of the Noble Eightfold Path. Earlier today, we were doing walking meditation, and as we were walking on the path, I was reminded once again of the Buddha's teaching on the fact that the path, the spiritual path, is not a freeway, not a big motorway, but is rather an ancient and overgrown path that is we need a lot of discernment and deep looking to be able to discover each one of us for ourselves. It's described as being an ancient and overgrown hunter's path in the forest that, while well trodden in ancient times, is barely discernible, and that each one of us needs to look very deeply to find that path for ourselves. And as we continue along with the Noble Eightfold Path, this image was very much in my mind today as we were walking in the forest. One of the most radical acts that we can engage in as a spiritual practitioner is to show up for each moment just as it is. And as we show up for each moment just as it is, we also explore how it came to be, what causes and conditions manifested so that something has come to be. In this way, over time, we begin to understand that we're constantly in a process of co-creation. One of the founding principles of the United States in the Declaration of Independence is the three inalienable rights, the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And for me, actually, I think that's where the fundamental issue lies for many of us. The fundamental issue is in how we approach the final phrase in there, the pursuit of happiness. Pursuit has at least two meanings. The first is the meaning of running after, like we're in hot pursuit of something. And funnily enough, many times we don't even have an idea of what that thing is, really, the thing that we're in hot pursuit of. We might be running after an idea, something that we think is outside of ourselves, that we might not even recognize when we touch it. That thing might be happiness, it might be liberation, it might be peace. The second meaning of pursuit is occupation. And this is where, in Buddhism, the inside of the Buddha would be in complete agreement. Once we have right understanding about what it is we're searching for, we need to be constantly engaged in the occupation of that thing. It's not a part-time job, it's a full-time occupation. Discovering that thing, whatever that thing might be for us, whether it's happiness or peace or liberation, whatever word we use to name that thing, knowing that words are all concepts. We know that that thing is not something that just happens after 20, 30, or 40 years, but something to touch in each and every moment. In the same way, we engage in the occupation of mindfulness, of meditation, of spirituality in each and every moment without a sense of division between moments of meditation and moments of everyday life. In the Jewish tradition, we speak of tikkun olam. It means healing the world. And there's a sense that the work of each one of us is to mend all the broken pieces in ourselves and in each other, bridging the seeming separateness. Often when we think of the world, or we think of healing the world, or being of service to the world, we think of the world as only being something outside of this outer layer of skin. But the insight of the Buddha is that the world outside and the world inside are both very much interconnected, that they are constantly in relationship. So many of us have this beautiful heart of service, of being of service to our world. Healing the world, to take the concept from Judaism, is many of our aspirations. And that's a very beautiful word, the word healing. The root of healing, it comes from the Old English helen, which actually means whole, coming back, bringing all the parts of ourselves together and becoming whole again, to fix the brokenness and the division. And this is, for me, one of the foundations for our exploration on right livelihood, which is the factor of the path that we're exploring together this evening and this week. How we engage in acts of service to the world inside and the world outside. How our way of living is equitable. It's in harmony with our deepest aspiration so that there's no inner or outer conflict. So in continuing on with our exploration of the Noble Eightfold Path and diving deeply into this factor of right livelihood, we've arrived at the final factor of the ethics section of the Noble Eightfold Path. Our way of making a living in the world, right livelihood. The Noble Eightfold Path factor of right livelihood directs our mindful attention to whether the way we make our living is in accordance and alignment with our deepest aspiration. Please remember that the Buddha always taught holistically. The Buddha always taught in such a way that his teachings were to be applied in all aspects of our life, looking at the whole person with the understanding that nothing can exist in isolation or by itself alone, that everything's always in relationship with other factors of existence, whether that thing is our happiness, our sadness, our spiritual life, our life in the marketplace. Everything's deeply connected. In fact, they're not only connected, in many ways, they are one and the same thing, just different facets of the same thing. Many of us will have heard the story of Tay's teacher, our grandfather teacher, asking Tay, when Tay was a novice, to return to close the door again because he closed it noisily. He'd slammed the door. In one sense, of course, this was to teach Tay how to close the door properly. But on a deeper level, this is because each and every moment of our life, even or perhaps especially the seeming ordinary, everyday moments of our life, reflect our insight and our practice. If we're incapable of walking slowly, of picking up and putting down a cup, a plate, a cushion, or a kettle, or a moment, gently and lovingly, if everything is always crash, 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 then how can it be possible that it's a different situation internally? With the insight of Buddhism, that's not possible. Everything reflects everything else. This is the insight of the Avatamsaka Sutta. This understanding of non-separation begins our exploration of right livelihood. It's an important factor in our exploration of right livelihood. It's with the understanding that if we compartmentalize our lives in such a way that we're living pairs of opposites, then it'll be very challenging, if not impossible, to be at peace, to cultivate a sense of centeredness, a sense of presence, real mindfulness and insight. Let's have a sound of the bell. So I'd like to break it down for everybody. In its most pithy form, right livelihood is a livelihood that expresses your practice of the 5 mindfulness trainings. That's the most pithy understanding of right livelihood. It's our concrete expression, a livelihood that's our concrete expression of our understanding of the 5 mindfulness trainings. The 5 mindfulness trainings, or the 5 precepts, as they're called in some Buddhist traditions, are described in the text as being 5 ancient gifts that are treasured and honored and spoken of often by the wise. This is such a different way of approaching ethics than our usual sense of rules and commandments and shoulds. In the West, in particular, we tend to approach ethics with a sense of obligation. There's a sense of heaviness around ethics. So when I was preparing a little, reflecting on Right Livelihood for this evening's talk, I was thinking there might be some friends who are a little relieved that tonight's the last factor on ethics. But just like right view in Buddhism, there's no way that we can avoid or go around the aspect of ethics, how we interact with the world around us. Our mindfulness practice will always bring us back to this heartfelt sense of understanding how our actions impact ourselves and others. In the Buddhist way of looking and understanding, we see ethics as a great gift, as a true treasure of the mind, the heart, and the body that we offer to ourselves and to others as a gift of love. Since they manifest, or they should manifest, our self-love and also our heart of loving kindness towards others and the world around. So please don't take ethics or mindfulness trainings as yet another way to judge yourself or to judge others. Another way, yet another way to tell yourself that you're not good enough. That would be coming from the root of ill will, one of those 3 very deep roots that we have in our consciousness. Rather, the invitation of the Buddha and the invitation of this ethics section of the Noble Eightfold Path is to allow your ethics to be a manifestation of self-loving kindness, a way of caring for yourself and caring for others. Samma ajiva, right or upright or complete livelihood, is of great importance, serious importance for any practitioner, any meditation practitioner. So what exactly is right livelihood, and how can we engage with our work in the world so that we're developing the other 7 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path while engaging in our work, while earning a living? Is work a total throwaway? Just something we need to do, maybe a means to an end, a way of supporting ourselves so that we can get on with our spiritual life at other times when we're not working? Or could it be that our work in the world can be a way of bringing healing and transformation to ourselves and to the world? If we consider ourselves as engaged practitioners and engaged Buddhism at its heart, if we see that engaged Buddhism at its core is about engaging with each moment of our life as a spiritual practice, as a moment to wake up, then we need to see our work life. If we average about 8 or so hours a day of work, it's 1/3 of a lot of our life that we're engaged in working. So it's a big chunk of our life. It's a big chunk that we can be bringing our mindful attention to. It may seem absolutely ordinary or humdrum, but it's those ordinary, humdrum, or boring or challenging things that are exactly the point of practice. It's not about always going around walking on lotus flowers and listening to celestial music. That would be wonderful, but it's about engaging with each moment as it is. That's a real practice. It sounds nice to say it, but it's an every moment practice of engaging with what is, especially if it's difficult, especially if it's challenging, especially if it's boring. Those are the very moments in which we have a powerful opportunity to transform our consciousness, to try something new, and to expand our envelope, to expand our boundaries just a little more than before. Speaking of work, in the Zen tradition, we have the saying from the very famous teacher, Master Pai Chang. In Vietnamese, I think the master's name is Bak Truong. No work, no food. And this is, of course, focusing on, if we don't engage in physical work, for monastics or for practitioners, then don't expect just to, have benefits, that we have to like always be contributing. But on a deeper level, work here doesn't just mean physical work, but it means the work of transforming our heart and our consciousness. So each one of us is working on something a little bit different, is focused on something a little different. And this invitation of no work, no food is an invitation for us to consider where our edge is in each moment, where we're challenged, where we're called forth into the unknown a little bit. And to be able to stand in that place and to step forward, to always be doing our work, whatever our work is. And work is not hard labor. Work in English has this connotation of being something heavy. But if we can approach, especially as a path factor, work here can mean this process of transformation, this process of change, this process of growth. So with the insight of interbeing, we understand that one thing contains everything. We might understand it intellectually in the beginning, and that's already great. Eventually, it may become something that we begin to touch in each moment of our life. When we encounter the practice for the first time, we might begin by focusing only on one thing, thinking that that's it for me. I'm just going to do that. For example, I'm just going to focus on meditation. That's it of the path for me. However, I mean, that's already great. That's fantastic. We should celebrate it. But I'll let you in on a little secret here. If we continue practicing even that one thing wholeheartedly, then over time we'll notice that other aspects of our life are affected as well. We might begin, for example, by cultivating mindfulness in some simple way. Perhaps mindfulness of our steps, perhaps mindfulness of our breath, perhaps something as simple as stopping with the sound of the bell. And as this practice bears fruit, as this practice grows and becomes a natural part of our life, we become more sensitive to and aware of other aspects of our life. In Plum Village, when we have a transmission of the 5 precepts, the 5 mindfulness trainings, sometimes there are people who just want to take 1 training or 2 trainings thinking that they don't need to take 5 or the other ones don't resonate. We're actually very happy about that because it's our insight and it's our observation in Plum Village that by taking 1 training, a person's taking them all. Since by applying one of the mindfulness trainings wholeheartedly, all the other factors, all the other mindfulness trainings will begin to be practiced naturally because one thing contains everything. So if we begin meditating, be warned, sooner or later, a light will be shone on all different areas of your life, including the area of making a living or our way of making a living. So to a large extent, each one of us has to determine for ourselves through our own practice of mindfulness and mindful attention, and also deep looking, how to approach right livelihood, how to approach our livelihood in our own lives. Since even if we're in a perfect livelihood, it's possible to suffer very deeply and to cause others to suffer as well. It's important to remember that in this round of samsara, this endless round of the same thing over and over again. That there's, on the one hand, no perfect place. There's no perfect situation. And yet, on the other hand, every place is the perfect place, the most perfect, the place that you've been looking for. It's not somewhere else. It's right where we are. If as practitioners, we do our very best to cultivate the three aspects of the Noble Eightfold Path, Sila, which is ethics, Samadhi, concentration or immersion, and Prajna, insight, in each moment of our life, then each moment, regardless of what it is, can be a beautiful offering. And then there's nothing that is not Dharma. Tay said to me a number of years ago when we were having tea together, he said, you know what, Brother Fapai, one of the deepest teachings in Mahayana Buddhism is that if we cultivate awareness fully, there's nothing that's not the Dharma. There's nothing that's not a teaching. I think personally as practitioners, we should stop running around looking for the perfect place, a perfect moment, a perfect Sangha or whatever it might be, a perfect place for our sitting meditation, and get down to business with what we have right where we are now, just as we are. In some way, where we are, when we have this attitude of getting down to business with where we are, of not mucking around anymore, but planting ourselves fully in our lived experience right where we find ourselves, of understanding that there's nowhere that's perfect. There's no situation in this realm of samsara, in the saha world, that's perfect, where every single condition is always going to be roses and butterflies. When we understand that, and we understand at the same time that every place is a perfect place, then where we are and what we're doing becomes our Dharma, our way of manifesting the teachings, our way of manifesting the path, and our way of manifesting insight, right in whatever livelihood, in whatever place we find ourselves. That's our very place of transformation, our very place of practice, our very place in which we bring that healing to the world. It's nowhere else. It's right there where we are. Let's have a sound of the bell. Choosing to be fully where we are, doing what we're doing without being divided is a radical act. And it's one of the most powerful things, to choose to inhabit fully our experience, to not wish to be somewhere else, but to be able to transform that moment, each moment, into a moment of deep practice, of deep insight. So basically, in terms of right livelihood, the Buddha teaches that the conditions of our life, the material accumulations and so on, should come about in the following way. The Buddha says they should be acquired legally. They should be acquired peacefully, without coercion or violence or threat. They should be acquired honestly and in ways that don't cause harm and suffering for ourselves or for others. And by others here, we don't only mean other human beings, we also mean animals, we also mean insects, we mean the earth, we mean the atmosphere, and so on. Specifically, the Buddha said a practitioner should not engage in 5 types of business. Which 5? Business in weapons, business in human beings, business in meat, business in intoxicants, and business in poison. This is in the Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 5 and verse 177. And then in the Majjhima Nikaya, the Buddha says, and what, friends, is the wrong approach to your livelihood? Trickery, cajolery, insinuating, dissembling, and thirst for gain upon gain. So the Buddha, in this little excerpt, the first excerpt I read, mentions 5 specific kinds of livelihood which bring harm to ourselves and others, the world around and the atmosphere, the earth. And if we're serious about the development of our heart, it's best to avoid these areas. Dealing in weapons, in human beings, in meat production and butchery, in poisons, and in intoxicants. And then he further goes on to share some dishonest means of gaining wealth, which could also fall under wrong livelihood. Practicing deceit or treachery, soothsaying, I think that's fortune telling, trickery, and lending money at high rates of interest. So obviously any occupation that doesn't contain within itself an emphasis on right speech and right action would not be considered to be right livelihood. The positive way of looking at right livelihood is described in the commentaries as looking at rightness or completeness, because again, this word in Pali, samma, can also mean completeness or uprightness. Regarding our actions, rightness or completeness regarding other people, and rightness or completeness with relationship to objects. So rightness regarding actions means that we should be wholehearted in our work and dealings. We work diligently and wholeheartedly and conscientiously, not idling away time or claiming to have worked longer hours than we actually did, or pocketing the company's goods. And for me, when I first came into contact with that aspect of rightness regarding our actions in terms of right livelihood, I was reflecting back to my time as an apprentice chef. At that time, in the hospitality industry, it's still the same. It didn't really matter how many hours we worked. We would start we had to start before our start time. So if we started, for example, at 6 in the morning, which I did for a period of time, we'd have to be there about 5:30 at the latest, to get everything ready to really start our shift at 6. And then we would work until we're done. If people are eating or there's other work to be done, we would still continue to be there. So often, I would work, I think 10 or 11, sometimes 12 hours a day. And we saw it as part of our training to do, because we're learning from other chefs, we're learning how to do things, but we had timesheets that we were all given. And even though this was the understanding that we had, that we worked for however many hours was necessary. And it was actually the culture at the time in the workplace I was working in, for apprentices to work, the more hours you were there was the better. In fact, they even had a dormitory attached, not very far away, so you wouldn't have to commute very far to go to work. You could basically work as many hours as you wanted to. It was encouraged. And yet on the timesheets, we were always asked to write down just 8 hours. And I did that for a couple of years. And then I thought to myself, you know what? While I'm not necessarily suffering, this is what I chose. I chose this, this career path. I'm actually going to write down the hours that I'm working. And so I began, not because I was going to get paid, I was indentured. So which meant that I didn't get paid by hour. It was just a set wage, which it wasn't that much. This is in 1993. And I remember earning, it was about $150 before a week Australian before tax. So one gets very inventive about one's needs with those wages. So it wasn't about wages, but I just thought to myself, you know what? I really want to just share, this is the amount of time that I'm working. I'm not trying to change anything. I just want to be honest about it. And so that there's like human resources and everything, they're aware of it. And so I started to do this, and a couple of weeks later, I was called down to human resources, and they said, why are you not telling the truth on your timesheets? And I said, I am. This is the hours that I'm working. They said, but everybody else is just working 8 hours. I said, well, everybody else is just writing 8 hours on their timesheets, but we're actually working a lot more. And I felt this was a way of having rightness regarding our actions, not because I expected anything, but because I wanted to be transparent about things. And so that like those who were not necessarily working in that area would be aware of what was actually needed for the training of all of us apprentices. I was going to say novices, all of us novice chefs at the time, that it wasn't just 8 hours a day, and that was actually quite unrealistic. And so I did that, and it was an interesting process. It can sometimes be quite nerve-wracking to have that sense of rightness regarding our actions. And also, yeah, like being aware of, like in that industry, like as I said, you heard the wages that I was having, but also being aware of not, as a number of us kind of did, like I kind of got more sensitive to this as I was a practitioner. We do have to taste the food that we're cooking, obviously, but for a lot of the chefs, it turned into grazing on the food that we were preparing. So, and it was quite attractive to me, because then I wouldn't have to buy food or try to buy food at home. I would be able to eat at work. So having a sense of, this doesn't actually belong to me. This is not mine at all. This belongs to the company that I was working for. So rightness regarding actions, of knowing what's mine and not taking what hasn't been given to me. And then the second is rightness regarding persons, which means showing respect and consideration to our employers, which can sometimes, be challenging on occasion. If we're to employees, if we're an employer, and that can also be challenging sometimes, to our colleagues, and also to our customers. So that sense of not treating people or others like an object, but really having that respect and that consideration, of nurturing a spirit of collaboration rather than competition with our workmates. Or if we own a business, trying to be fair in our dealings, fair and transparent as possible in our dealings with customers, with the people that actually support our business. And then rightness regarding objects means that in business transactions and sales, the articles to be sold should be presented truthfully. There shouldn't be, in an ideal world, deceptive advertising or misrepresentations or tricky maneuvers. But also this aspect means not to acquire more than we need for our life at the expense of others. And this is definitely an important consideration with regard to the use of resources and care for the atmosphere and care for the earth. The Buddha spoke about some of the central themes of his teaching in terms of their negation, their negative, saying not this, not this. In original languages, in Pali, it's neti. In English, it can sound a little negative to say it's not this, it's not that, but the original tone, rather than being negative, is invitational. For example, sometimes rather than saying what something is, which would give us yet another view, another idea to hold on to out of all of the many views that we have already, The Buddha would say what something is not. For example, nirvana is not hold, it's not hot, it's not cold, and so on. This is to invite us to explore for ourselves, right in the heart of our lives, what's meant by such things. This invitational approach of not this is how the Buddha framed right livelihood. In each of the areas that I just mentioned, the 5 types of business: business in weapons, business in human beings, business in meat, business in intoxicants, and business in poison. The Buddha wanted us to reflect deeply on the effects of our choices and our actions and how they affect ourselves and affect others. A simple example is, of course, the arms trade. We are directly making money off harming and injuring others, even if we ourselves don't pull the trigger. Also, the same is true of the other categories. If, for example, if we're truly dedicated to having a clear mind and a clear view, and if we understand how everything is interconnected on all levels, then how can we deal in intoxicants which cloud other people's consciousness? It wouldn't make sense at all. Why don't we have a sound of the bell? But we do our best with what we have, where we are, within our own circumstances. And knowing that, as I've said before, we do not, as much as we would wish it to be otherwise, we do not live in an ideal world. We're living in samsara. Most things are in shades of gray. Most things are imperfect, including ourselves. So we try to do the very best that we can to apply the Buddhist insight on the 5 mindfulness trainings in our work as being the heart of right livelihood. And definitely, let's not use these insights to judge ourselves or to judge others. Through our work, whatever it might be, we find our way of being of service to the world inside and outside. Speaking of service, a few years ago, I was doing a lot of administrative work for the Sangha. And one of the brothers said to me, wow, it must be so tiring, so boring to be doing all this paperwork. And so I began to consider, because I wasn't really feeling bored or tired. It wasn't that my dream of monastic life was to be creating spreadsheets. But it's part of the way things are. It's one of the things that needs to happen. And so I began to look at the word administration. And I realized that the root of administration is the word minister, which means to be of service. And so I approached it as my way of being of service. So it wasn't something so bothersome to get done so I could get on with my life or to get on with something meaningful. That thing that not many of us in the Compassionate Ocean Sangha have described their work with spreadsheets or as meaningful. But I actually discovered meaning in that work because I was approaching it with that energy of letting it be my way of helping the Sangha. And so something like that can as ordinary as that can be a moment of practice. So our world is increasingly complex and interconnected. So due to this, it's very difficult. I want to say this as a monastic. I feel increasingly it's very difficult to live and to work in the world as a householder and keep the quote unquote perfect environment that a meditator often is looking for. The perfect ethics or perfect environment that a meditator is looking for. A farmer, for example, will need to plow the soil. There's probably some worms or other insects in the soil that will be harmed through that act. They've got to consider how to minimize the harm to their crops from wildlife. Public health workers kill mosquitoes and so on, and bacteria, and at this moment in time, viruses. A truck driver might be in a position to have to transport arms or poison. So it's not black and white. At this moment in time, when we think about, somebody not so long ago was saying to me, what about cutting the grass? We're hurting the grass and things like that. And then it's important to see, like, in those kind of things, they need to take place in order for our life to go on. And right now we see the situation with COVID-19. Our health workers need to disinfect and kill viruses wherever they go in order for our lives to be able to continue for most of us. And so would we say that our health workers are violating the first mindfulness training of not killing? If we have a certain view, we could say, well, yes, they're killing viruses and bacteria and things like that. But with a broader view, we see, well, actually, they're protecting life. So sometimes our view needs to be a little bit broader. So it's not black and white. It never was. These are invitations into understanding that we're all part of many complex systems. And our choices, even the small ones, have a ripple-on effect and impact. We need to earn a livelihood while constantly making an effort to grow in love and compassion, and concretely, to the best of our capacity, manifest these values in our actions as best we can. In Plum Village, as novices, we learn and we memorize a number of gathas, little poems that we recite as we breathe in and out. We recite silently as we're going throughout the day, throughout our actions. And in one of the verses, it's called the verse on taking the first steps of the day. We have a verse that goes, as I take these steps of the day, I vow to walk with solidity and freedom. And if I inadvertently step on any insects as I'm walking, may they touch great happiness. May they be reborn in the Pure Land. And so even in that gatha, we recognize the fact that just by existing, we may inadvertently take the life of another through lack of mindfulness, or just simply by breathing in or breathing out. I remember when I was training as a chef, I went through a time when I was in my apprenticeship. I actually went through a time when I had quite black and white or rigid views about the practice. Maybe in a way, I guess you could say I was a Buddhist fundamentalist at that moment in time, if such a thing were possible. I was already a vegetarian, having become a vegetarian in about 1992. I'll never forget, actually, when I became a vegetarian, how my grandmother reacted. She lived in a country town here in Australia, which has a nickname, Australia's beef capital. That's the name of the town, and then Australia's beef capital. I just know some of you are dying to look up where it is. Have fun. They even actually, every year they have a whole week that they call Beef Week, and they crown a beef queen and have a parade and everything. It's kind of like a low rent version of the Miss America. Anyway, when I became a vegetarian, I came into the kitchen after I was sharing with my grandmother. A little while later, I came in the kitchen and my grandmother was sitting at the kitchen table and she was sobbing. So I asked her what was wrong. And she looked up from her tears and she said, "You have an eating disorder and I don't know how to help you." Anyway, when I became an apprentice chef, as part of my training, I had to do a butchery course. I had to do this butchery course in order to become OzMeat certified, to get my OzMeat certificate. of butchery. Now, I suffered a lot. I really suffered. I didn't want to learn how to cut up animal carcasses, to have all the carcasses brought in, and then we had to learn and to chop up all the carcasses. But it was a required module in my training as an apprentice chef to do the OzMeat certification. And then to do, after that, to do a stint in the butchery. So I didn't know what to do, you know, because it was necessary. And so I went and I had a consultation with my teacher. And he said, you should remind yourself every day that your profession, the chef profession, is one of the better ones, in the sense that you're feeding people, you're giving them nourishment, and you haven't killed the animals. You're not eating them. The system is bigger than you. And he said to me, you can do at least two things in this situation. One, you can do what I did when I was a novice monk in Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, after ordaining, we would be taken to the morgue to see the dead bodies and to contemplate impermanence. And he shared with me that you can contemplate impermanence while you're handling the animals. And then also you should hold the intention to bless both the animal that's made this sacrifice, willingly or unwillingly, and the person who will eat it, holding the wish that the person's heart and mind will be open. And so that's what I did. And in case any of you are wondering, I do have an OzMeat certificate somewhere. I think my brother has it at home in like files of these different certificates that I have. It's not something that I ever thought that I would refer back to, but I went through that stage in my life. So additionally, the Buddha offered some guidance for how a householder, how those of us who are not monastics should engage in the world that have a clear relationship to right livelihood. So the Buddha said there's 4 things that lead to the welfare and happiness of a householder. First is the accomplishment of persistent effort. Whatever might be the way in which we're earning a living, we're skillful and we're diligent. We keep working at it. We keep growing in our profession. And the second is the accomplishment of protection. The person, we treasure and we care deeply for whatever we have, whatever we've gained through our work, whether it's knowledge or information, or if it's possessions, we don't need to accumulate too many of them, but whatever we have, we take very good care of and treasure. And the third is the accomplishment of good friendship, that wherever we dwell, we associate with people who are of good nature and that help us to grow in some way. And the fourth is the accomplishment of a balanced life, that we know our income and our expenditures, and we lead a life that's in balance, not too extravagant, but also not too miserly and worried and fearful, holding on to things too tightly. So for we monastics, we also need to practice to live lightly, to not be a burden to others, but rather to be a support. In fact, in the Metta Sutta, the phrase that is used is to be of light livelihood, to not be a heavy burden to families, to not be always asking after this or that, but to live simply and enjoy the simple conditions of our life, and also to live lightly on the earth. For all of us, the situation in our world is so much more complex each and every day. And in our own mindfulness trainings, the 5 mindfulness trainings and the 14, we're invited to become aware of investing in companies that deplete the earth of natural resources and harm the earth. So there are so many, rather than just the usual forms of livelihood that were mentioned, the 5 kinds of business, there are also many layers to livelihood and being of light livelihood, living lightly, whether it's in terms of the earth or in relationship to others, of not being too much of a burden emotionally or otherwise to others, and also not taking too much of resources for ourselves, making sure that we're sharing as much as we can equitably, equally with others. Then also there's other forms of livelihood that maybe didn't exist in the Buddha's time that we can look at as well. Like, how about producers of violent movies or shows or video games? Something to look at. I once had a young friend say, this is actually last year in Deer Park, they said that they didn't watch violent things because they didn't want to see people dying in their living room. And I thought that was a very powerful statement, that young person who was probably about 14 or 15 said that they'd chosen not to watch violent things, horror movies and so on, because they didn't want people to die in front of them. So once we've found a suitable job, if we're lucky enough to find a suitable job, sometimes, especially in this situation, I want to say clearly, to find a job in this current economic situation is already a wonderful accomplishment. So, and to even more, to find a suitable job. So again, meet yourself where you're at with Right Livelihood. Once you've found a suitable job, the more long-range task begins, applying the insight of the Buddha's teachings, the Noble Eightfold Path at work. If we can only apply the mindfulness trainings or the Noble Eightfold Path or mindfulness during meditation retreats or days of mindfulness, then I wonder what serious benefit we're actually going to obtain, whether we'll actually begin to see a life-giving transformation, this little ripple becoming a current and taking over the stream effect of the mindfulness training in our life. If we go to work and we lose all of our concentration and our calmness, our solidity, when we're confronted with the vibrations of the workplace, then that's a pity. That's a deep pity. To grow as a practitioner, it's important to consider how to apply the whole of the Noble Eightfold Path as much as we can in each moment, even in the workplace, or perhaps especially in the workplace. And some of the more challenging situations that we're going to come across are most likely going to be those that we meet during working hours. Our jobs are particularly important occasions to look at how we apply the Noble Eightfold Path for the following reasons. Let me just think of a couple of reasons. Maybe first of all, we don't usually have the support of a Sangha at work. We're on our own. So it's a real, when the rubber meets the road kind of situation when we're at work. The second might be that work, family also, but in this case, we're talking about work. Work tends to be a place in which a lot of our ingrained tendencies and habit energies and habitual responses or as yet unhelpful seeds might be watered. So we tend to notice a lot of ill will or aversion or greed or sometimes confusion manifesting in the workplace. And then a third aspect might be that so much of our work life is really just focused on making a living, just doing something that might seem absolutely ordinary to just be able to feed ourselves and to take care of those that we love. So just as a little reflection, let's touch briefly on the relationship at work between the three ethics factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, the factors of right speech, right action, and now right livelihood. So right livelihood will not really be complete unless it includes right speech and right action as well. The form of wrong speech and wrong action not to be watered are those in which lying, backbiting, gossiping, or harming of others would be involved. If we're honest in our speech and our actions, our employers and others will tend to be quite pleased with what we're doing. And we'll be growing in the practice by facing or recognizing first, and then facing our mind's opposing tendencies. Perhaps we might notice when our mind tries to find the easy way out, or we try to blame others for our own errors. So whatever our work situation is, in an office, in a factory or a shop, we can feel the benefits of practicing the mindfulness trainings or ethics as we see them. So always growing in our understanding of the trainings. If we don't engage in negative gossip or slander, the office politics or academic politics, whatever they might be, but keep nurturing the good in each situation that arises with other workers. Maybe everybody else is gossiping, and we need to be there to just kind of be in the room, and so that people feel we're part of like the team or something. And we can even like have a few laughs or something, but then whenever we say something, we're putting in words that are wholesome, that are kind of watering something good in others. So we speak only good about people behind their back, or just helping people to see another perspective. And if we do that, we'll find that over time, we're less often at the receiving end of other people's anger. In fact, if we're really able to practice and apply aspects of the Noble Eightfold Path at work, we might actually find that we bring an energy of peace to the workplace. One way to practice right action, which is the other aspect of ethics at work in our livelihood, might be to really seriously avoid anything even remotely related to stealing for our own personal gain. And that could be paper, ink, staples, office supplies, or time. Any of those things that were not expressly given to us but belong to the company. And I shared about that a little bit earlier. So as we embark on this week's exploration of right livelihood, I'd actually like to propose an exercise this week, especially for our friends in the Compassionate Ocean Sangha. I'd like everybody to reflect on some examples of how you might apply the different path factors at work in your livelihood. So the Noble Eightfold Path, right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Then how would you apply those things at work? What are some examples of applying those at work? Is that even something that's possible? So that's my invitation for our friends this week. And I certainly wish you a very joyful and wonderful week of practice of right livelihood. It's been such a delight to share with you this evening. I hope that you have gotten something out of this evening's sharing. May it be one of many blessings on your path. Please keep safe and keep well.